Good evening, everybody, and welcome. We are thrilled that you could join us today for a conversation with Mark Nepo on surviving storms. My name is Alex Elliott, and I'm the Senior Manager of Events and Engagement for the Public Programs Department of California Institute of Integral Studies, which, as you may know, is a nonprofit university located in San Francisco. As many of us are descendants of settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those who were forcefully brought to this continent, we, CIIS public programs, must recognize and never forget that our university's building in San Francisco occupies traditional, unceded Ramaytush Ohlone lands. If you are interested in learning more about Native lands, languages, and territories, we encourage you to visit native-land.ca. Before we get started tonight, I want to go over a few general tips and some troubleshooting items. We are going to be having a live Q&A after the conversation tonight for anyone who's watching this live. So please submit your questions at any time using our anonymous web form, which is linked in the event description just below this video. Our presenters are going to pull questions from that form after their talk, and then we'll try to get through as many as we have time for. We do have automatically generated captions for this event, which you can toggle on and off using the closed captioning button right in YouTube. If you're having any issues with your audio or your video, we always suggest that you first try reloading the page. And then if you're still having issues, you might want to adjust your video settings within YouTube. Now let me first introduce our presenters, Mark Nepo and Cindy Shearer, and then we will get right to their conversation. A writer and text image artist, Cindy Shearer is professor and program chair for the MFA in Interdisciplinary Arts and Writing and PhD in Integral Transpersonal Psychology here at CIIS. She is publisher for the InterArts journal Mission at 10th and the podcast series Meaning Making and Artifact. She is currently reworking her text and image work, 10 Not So Tangible Tools for Writers, as a collection of essays for writers. Mark Nepo is a poet and spiritual advisor who has taught in the fields of poetry and spirituality for over 40 years. With over 1 million copies sold, Mark has moved and inspired readers and seekers all over the world with his #1 New York Times bestseller, The Book of Awakening. Mark has published 22 books and recorded 15 audio projects. In September of 2022, his 23rd book, Surviving Storms, Finding the Strength to Meet Adversity, was published. Mark is a regular columnist for Spirituality and Health magazine. In 2015, Mark was given a Life Achievement Award by Age Nation. In 2016, he was named by Watkins, Mind, Body, Spirit, as one of the 100 most spiritually influential living people, and was also chosen as one of OWN's Super Soul 100, a group of inspired leaders using their gifts and voices to elevate humanity. In his 30s, Mark was diagnosed with a rare form of lymphoma, a struggle which helped to form his philosophy of experiencing life fully while staying in relationship to an unknowable future. Mark devotes his writing and teaching to the journey of inner transformation and the life of relationship. And now let me turn it over to Mark Nepo and Cindy Shearer.
Good evening, Mark. It's so nice to see you tonight. So great to have the chance.
Oh, it's wonderful to see you too. And we should let folks know that many moons ago, we were in graduate school together at the University of Albany. So I'm so thankful for you to host this.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Actually, I was gonna talk about that right in the beginning because I think it was really a factor for me in reading the book. I was thinking as I was reading, especially because you use your cancer as a touchstone, I was thinking, well, I had a sense of this person from a long time ago. First of all, it's amazing to think that anything happened 40 years ago. Like that's, I mean, really, aren't we both much younger than that?
I think so.
But I was thinking about my reading process and how having a sense of you from another time I could really imagine, I was imagining you as you were using that example. And it made me think about that idea of imagination and kind of your hope for it when people are reading the book. And that, when you, in essence, as you invite us to do heart work, as you so beautifully describe, kind of what is the role of imagining for you? Do you feel like that's a useful tool to bring into
Yeah,
the
I
reading
think, and
process?
so first, I mean, I think it's interesting to note that the word imagine literally means to make real.
Mhm. Oh, wow.
So while we think of imagination as making things up, it's really, I think, how we engage our heart in such a way that we're a conduit between the inner world and the outer world. So, my hope, and I'm a very heart-centered, obviously, person and reader and seeker and writer. My hope with any of my books is to introduce the reader to their own gifts and their own wisdom. And I have found through the years that, I'm sure that won't surprise you, that the creative process is very much the introspective process. The only
Mhm.
difference, I just happen to write it down.
Mhm. Yeah, for me, it's just such an important piece in our work in the MFA at CIIS. We really work from the perspective that writing, art making is an inquiry driven process as much as it's a production process. And so I really feel that a lot when I'm reading your work, is that opportunity to both become aware of something, but to also keep inquiring into it, keep, the opportunities that you offer in the book often to like keep learning, on and on and on.
Well, and this is one of the things that I feel has been such a gift in my own inquiry, and it's the role of questions and true listening. In the outer world of circumstance, well, questions have answers, like what time were we going to meet today, and how were we going to turn all this technology on. But in the inner world of meaning, questions don't have answers. And I think that we ask questions there the way that we would open a door we'd like to walk through with someone. Or we swing questions like lanterns between us to help see a
Right.
little bit further in the dark. So questions, when it comes to the inner world of meaning, questions open relationships,
Mhm.
not answers. So, a long time ago, if I'm talking to someone and they say to me, "Get to the point," I just stop talking.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's well said. When you're using the word question, it makes me think about questions are, an outcome of curiosity. And I really felt that a lot when I was reading the book, in part, I think maybe because I did have this little bit of sense of you, but I think there's also the invitation in the work for that for the opportunity to be curious. For me, one of the things that kind of going back to the opening of the book again was I noticed that you use your cancer as a touchstone right
Yeah.
away. And it made me think a lot about, kind of who you were at that time and who you are now. And and I guess my question was like, why was that important for you? Why was it important to draw from that past time as you're sort of looking, as you're standing in this present time,
Well, yeah,
and wanting to bring this work forward?
sure. And I think, in the very beginning, the first chapter is the old world is gone. And
Hmm.
that was the touchstone. I think that many people, not just myself, but many people, I found when the pandemic came on, um, unexpectedly, I had these echoes come up from my journey, my cancer journey, which was so many decades ago.
Hmm.
And this one, as you know, I mean, the key thing was that when I was diagnosed in my early 30s, I went obviously to a doctor one day who told me I had cancer. And of course, I was thrown upside down, inside out, and said, "You must have the wrong file. It must be someone else." And but when I left that appointment, the door I had come through to keep that appointment was gone.
Hmm.
The old world, there was no return to life before that moment. And I think why that came up for me as a touchstone, because I think that's what the pandemic has done for humanity globally. The old, as much as, and as much as we'd like to return, as much as we'd like to deny it or be angry about it or feel it's unjust, the old world is gone. And the only way forward is to love each other, and through listening and through the questions and the curiosity and the stories, so that in our turn, it's our turn. The things that challenge us are different, but every generation has its turn at being here. And will we choose love over fear? Will we choose curiosity over sameness? Will we retreat or lean into each other?
Yeah, I wondered if you had used the example in part. I mean, obviously it was incredibly pivotal, but also because it was something that so many could relate to. It's the kind of thing that we all know is like, yeah, that really changes you. And you do really, in the book, I think, use that opening as a way to segue into much larger questions about kind of where we're at. And I thought about that as well, like cancer feels like a tangible storm, but the storms that we've been in for the last 3 or 4 years, they aren't, I mean, many of us dealing with things we've never had to deal with before. And so I thought it was an interesting and a good approach to start with something where we could feel landed.
Well, thank you. And I want to say that, so much of my writing process is discovery, that, I can't say to you that I consciously said, oh, let's choose something relatable that will invite the reader. I follow, and this is where I mean this is it's also not just the creative process, but the introspective process is I follow a feeling, a question, a turmoil, a confusion, a wonder, a metaphor. Anything that strings my heart, I follow. And then if I'm authentic in that following, then I'm rewarded with an insight or a pattern or a larger parallel. And I go, oh, and then I follow and see where that goes. I don't plan like, oh, let's do this, and then it'll cause that, and it'll wind up there. I'm not that smart. But it's real. That's where we get into the heart work. That's where we get into the heart work. And I think that, it is I mean, I remember being, and this is also a reference in this cancer centered moment, was in 2001 when the towers came down. Shortly after that, I was scheduled, and I was leading a wellness retreat that was for cancer patients, survivors, loved ones, and healing professionals, all an integrated group. It was in New Hampshire. And it was so fresh, it was days after the towers went down. And there was a brave, amazing woman in a wheelchair who'd been through her third surgery and had a bandana around her head. And she said quietly, it's a terrible thing what just happened, but now we all belong to the same club. And being a cancer survivor, knew exactly what she meant. The moments of crisis, the moments of illness, the difficult transition points only make acute the archetypal decision points in everyone's lives. And we like to think, oh well, that's different, that's not me. I thank God I don't have to deal with that. But it's really the same journey that we're all on, that's only made more acute by great love and great suffering. And so everyone who suffers, and we all suffer, everyone who suffers has a particular wisdom that the rest of us need. And we take turns. One of my very short poems is a guy, and my poems, as well as my books, if I'm authentic enough, then what comes out becomes my teacher.
Mhm.
And then I have to stay in relationship to it. And so one of my small teachers is a small poem of mine that just goes like that, that those who wake are the students, those who stay awake are the teachers, how we take turns.
Mm. Beautiful. I'd love to dive into that a little bit of um maybe a little bit in relationship to some of what you say about grief, but also because I want to talk about the poetry some. One of the things that I was really touched by was the idea of the various ways that you invite us into an experience of both and. At one point in the book, you say, the question is often, is the glass half empty or half full? But actually, it's both, right? And
Yes.
I'm thinking in particular about the poem that I'm going to ask you to read called Adrift, which is about, can beauty and grief,
Yeah.
be, can we hold them at the same time? And so maybe let's start there. Maybe
Sure.
have you read that poem, and then let's talk a little bit about it and some of what arises from that.
Sure. So this poem came about during a time of grief for me and my wife Susan. There was a period of about a year, 18 months where I lost both my parents. She lost her mom. I lost a mentor and dear friend, and we lost our dear little dog child Mira at the time. So there was all this wave of grief and it was a summer day, and I was sitting on our deck in the back of our home, beautiful day, and I just fell off the edge into all of it. My heart just opened up and boom. And this is, and again, following, I was too exhausted to choose between the beauty of the day
Mhm,
and this well of grief I stepped into.
mhm,
And so I just followed the truth of that mixed feeling. And this is the poem that came, Adrift. Everything is beautiful, and I am so sad. This is how the heart makes a duet of wonder and grief. The light spraying through the lace of the fern is as delicate as the fibers of memory forming their web around the knot in my throat. The breeze makes the birds move from branch to branch as this ache makes me look for those I've lost in the next room, in the next song, in the laugh of the next stranger. In the very center, under it all, what we have that no one can take away, and all that we've lost face each other. It is there that I'm adrift, feeling punctured by a holiness that exists inside everything. I am so sad, and everything is beautiful.
mhm. Thank you. I really love hearing you. I love hearing you read it, and I love hearing the ways that you allow for tensions. I'm interested in what you say about writing as a discovery for you, because I feel that in the book that there are so many paragraphs where there's a statement and there's a statement that follows, and it's not an elaboration, it's an addition, or it's a way of moving on between the first statement and the second. And so I have that real sense in the writing of that's your way of using statement as question. It's a way of keeping us engaged in the same kind of inquiry that you're in, as
Well,
you've obviously thought about it and you're trying to name it for us, but still at the same time is the opportunity to engage it deeply for ourselves, and to let it in essence arise as question. At least that was my experience of it.
yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And so let me share two things here about that. One, like with the poem, that poem is a good example. So we get, the heart of that poem is that insight at the end that here, what we have that no one can take away, and all we've lost face each other. And I'm adrift in this holiness that's punctured in feeling it. I didn't know that when I started writing this poem. That was the reward for following this what am I doing here? Everything's sad and it's beautiful, and how do I hold that? Well, you don't hold it. You let it in. And then when I let it in, what happens? And so that was the reward for staying with that feeling, was glimpsing that insight. And so that's the kind of thing, like with and for me, the you know my the nonfiction books, for me it's all poetry. It's just these books are a larger canvas, that's all. And poetry for me is not words arranged in verse. It's the unexpected utterance of the soul, however that appears. And so you don't even have to write it down. I happen to write it down because that's what I do, and that's how I learn, and that's how it keeps growing. And so it is like, very much when I feel something's true and I feel like I want to explore it, it's like walking in a path in the woods and you're following the light, and you turn around a tree and you go, oh my God, there's a clearing, which you couldn't see until you made the turn. And look, I had no idea. So that is how, if I'm being, and this is one of the hardest things to teach young writers, and me too, when we were in grad school together, because right, we, all of us, when we begin to have any vision, is, oh my God, like finally have a vision. Can I be true to it? I aim. I want to write this. I want to, do, and then of course we aim and we miss. And we're so prematurely told that missing is failure, when it's just discovery. So, the hardest thing, it's like, to me, it's as if that unknown world of meaning is waiting to see if we're serious. And then when it sees we're serious enough, it says, okay, you have your plans, you have your scheme, your outline. Well, now that I know you're serious, now I'm going to show you what this is really about. Hold on. And that's the exciting launch. That's not missing. That's because the plans are kindling for the fire of aliveness that's waiting to take off if we're willing to be vulnerable and engage it. And so that leads to one other thing about, I so respect all the genres, and we know people, masters, and you could be a master poet or a master short story or a novelist. So I I respect devoting one's life to one genre. For me, it's evolved differently. I have, in following that pulse of what is true, I have over the years been asked to use the genres as tools in a toolbox. And so my job in my books is to have them all serve, hopefully, one seamless narrative that's seeking the truth. And so, that might mean at one point I need to be a scholar and to unfold history. It might mean one point I need to discover a myth or tell a story, or it might mean I need to suddenly move into poetry. And so I'm ready to turn at any point, for whatever tool that moment of inquiry is requiring of me.
Yeah, I really feel that in the book, in the so many ways that you do things. I think the poetry particularly stood out for me because of the idea of it almost felt kind of like an offering. It's like, okay, I've told you all these things, but here's a poem. Like, I felt like you could put it in your pocket, like, okay, I said all this stuff pages, but if you need something tangible, just take the poem and stick it in your pocket and carry it with you.
Well, one of the only models for that kind of writing goes back to Basho, and the wonderful Japanese poet of 1600s. And Basho, in addition to being, really making haiku the form it's known as, he also created a different form known as haibun, Haibun, which was a travel dialogue or journal interspersed with moments of heightened perception, or haiku. And one of his classic is Narrow Road to the Interior, where in 1689 he had asked an artist friend, "Hey, let's walk around the perimeter of the island of Japan," which was not easy, and nor was it safe. And they took a year, and that is an amazing inner travelogue of his journey. It has this daily travelogue, and then it's punctuated at unexpected moments with a haiku here and there. And one of the beautiful stories from that journey, which I so love, is that in the first month that they were on the road, they got to a place and they didn't know the way to the next town.
Mhm.
And there was a farmer, so they stopped and asked the farmer, and he started to explain. And then he said, "You know what? Just take my horse. My horse knows the way. When you get to the town, hit him on the rump and he'll come home." So they take the horse. He does lead them to the next town. And just before Basho sends him back, he ties a gift to the empty saddle.
Mm.
And that's one of those things, right?
Mhm.
Centuries ago, this almost anonymous moment, they hold the seams of the universe. That has always stayed with me. I think of my books as the empty gift that I want to tie to the saddle. And I
Mhm.
think that, I invite everyone to think about what's the gift you can tie to the empty saddle before you send the horse back on its way.
Mm. I think that's so interesting. A few years ago, a number of years ago now, I curated an art exhibit called Art as Offering. And
Ah,
I was playing with the idea of, I had been playing in my own work with the idea of art as gift. And then I really started to think about it, and I thought, well, gifts are something like, someone gives you a gift for your birthday or Christmas or whatever, and you kind of have to take it. But an offering, it's just there, right? You can take it or not. And so I'm so interested in this idea, and I know from this book how interested you are in individual words, which is something I want to talk about before we get off this call. But I think that's so interesting, because the way you talk about gift there feels so like offering to me. It's, like, yeah, you could pick up that gift if you want to, or in a way, that's what I meant about you could put it in your pocket. Or you could also, and this is kind of how I experienced the poetry, was, I was using the language of, it was kind of a touchstone for me, but it's also a way to me of saying to whoever is reading, there is another way to be in this as well. Like, quite literally, you can give it a new form. Look what I'm doing. I am like called to give this a new form. And that's really beautiful for me, that you can be
oh,
in the prose, and then you have, oh, here's another way to step into this. And so again, going back to that idea of imagining, I wonder how it allows people to imagine, what could I do with this? What could I make of it myself?
well, and I think that it involves, and that's the real value to me of imagination and creativity, is it reminds us that this moment has never happened,
Mhm.
and we don't have to. While there are tons of patterns and expectations and unspoken, you know, uh, influences everywhere, the fact is, uh, this has never happened before. And
Mhm.
so there we can do it any way we're called. And that's where that real root of that word imagine, to make real. We can make it real. Whatever we need to do to make it real. That's that's the poetry. And I think one of the things because I encourage, people who are reading my books, is to read it slowly. Take your time.
Mhm.
Read a chapter, live your life. Read a chapter, live your life, so that there's my hope is, my want is that it is a conversation between worlds, and your life is the thread between those worlds.
Mhm. Maybe segueing off that a little bit, I wanted to return to the idea of grief a little bit, because I thought
Yeah.
you were speaking of something really important when you were sharing the example about 9/11, and I was thinking about the time gap between creating this book and when it gets published, and what's happened in the world and in the pandemic. And I remember quite clearly a day I was out walking and listening to the news, and the announcement came through that 3 million people had died in the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
And just like trying to hold that number. And so I think there was a way in which, in the thick of it, the day we had lockdown here in San Francisco, and I'll always remember the picture of the Chronicle of like no one on the streets. Like you could look into San Francisco, there was literally just space in downtown. And there's grief attached to all of that, fear, obviously, in so many ways of what was happening in that time. But I think now that I was thinking about it today, we're kind of sideways to the pandemic. It's still there, but we're not in lockdown. Not as many people are threatened every day with, such severe health issue or dying, still very present. So many things have happened. January 6th has happened, significant gun violence. And so I find myself thinking about, your invitation to really explore the grief of our time. But I wonder for you, how your sense of that is evolving, kind of given as we're stepping into this next era. I'm not going to say post-pandemic because it's
Yeah.
still there. I don't want to be a
Well, and
denier about that.
I do think that these larger patterns echo the individual journey, and this is the challenge from the beginning of time. One of the, and again, let me go back to, I think, well, let me back up even one more step. I think every person that ever lives will be given the chance to be dropped into the depth of life.
Mhm.
Now, often that can be triggered by a difficult experience, loss, grief, being broken open. It also can be triggered by wonder and joy, being loved for the first time, beauty. It doesn't have to be, straight out suffering, but we will be given that opportunity. And that's when the deeper spiritual journey begins. And I think the challenge is for all of us is once opened, it's incumbent on us to stay open.
Mhm.
And that's, whether it's through love or whatever it might be. And this is the thing that, so again, to go back to my cancer journey, I was in my early 30s. I hadn't been through very much, anything really difficult. And all of a sudden I'm thrown into this life-threatening journey. And so, life became very raw, very immediate. There was no time for pretense or things that I thought were requirements to live all fell away. So on the other side of that, of course, and this is archetypal, and I remember there were this is like a bookend, right? So, and I especially want to share this because of our time at Albany. I, I had this twice around with the cancer, and in the second time around, where I had a rib removed from my back, I was on my way to start a January semester.
Oh, wow.
I was on my way to my first creative writing class where we were at SUNY
Right.
Albany, and I had this appointment with a thoracic surgeon, which I thought was going to be okay. What are we talking about here? Well, I never made it to that class. I thought I was going to leave and we'd do something the next week, the next day, and he said, "No, I'm admitting you now."
Wow.
I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I mean now." And so I never got to meet those students. I was
Mhm.
gone that entire semester.
Wow.
I didn't get back into the classroom to the following fall.
Wow.
And and then on the other side of all of that, I mean, the 3 years, which was the heat of that journey, after I was blessed to still be here, everybody went back to work, and I'm in my living room in my bathrobe going, what happened? Who
Mhm.
am I?
Mhm.
And then there's the question, which relates exactly to your question. How do I keep the urgency of being alive and the preciousness of life there without the emergency?
Mhm,
How
mhm,
do I keep things as tender and raw and truthful and vulnerable when mere silence is at stake?
mhm,
And this is where we are. Oh, so, yeah, we're all, we were all forced to stop. And in fact, the word Sabbath in the Jewish tradition literally means that the one day we do not turn one thing into another. And we were forced into a global Sabbath. We couldn't go from here to there. We couldn't scheme. We couldn't even dream. We had to accept the miracle of what is.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so, and there's what all the traditions have always spoken about in their own ways since the beginning of time. And that's what was waiting on, we're always challenged, the things that stop us. And then when we get ready to go again, where are we going?
mhm.
One of the great kind of hot paradoxes, I'm blessed at this time of my life to literally go all over the world. And when I get to wherever I'm going and I'm in those circles, my one job is to affirm for everyone that there's nowhere to go.
Mhm.
And it's a privilege. I'm happy to do it. Now, of course, we've all traveled on the surface world of circumstance, many different, but once we ever get wherever we are, whether that's literally traveling or traveling through experience, we open the same eternal moment. And how do we live there?
I was really taken by your statement in the book that, coming out of the cancer, you realized there was no there. There was just here. And if I can connect that to what I hear you saying is another thing that stood out for me was, like, how do you come to know that at a given stage of your life, separate from, the various storms that you have to deal with? But I was really touched when I was thinking about your book of that, you were so young. I had things around that same age, like my mother died when I was
Mm.
30. So I know that's a really pivotal time in life for very difficult things to happen, for various reasons, because you're sort of an adult, but your life is still very much, in development. And so I thought a lot about that. And I was thinking about that in relationship to, like, maybe the bigger, maybe unknown reasons why you use that time in your life, because I thought a lot of people in various stages of life in various ages are going to read this book, and there's all this wisdom there. But it's like finding wisdom, it's a whole journey. It's an ongoing journey. And so how do you step into the kinds of things that you're talking about?
Well,
you
I think,
know
I think, and this is one of the humbling things is that wisdom, I've learned after all these, wisdom isn't a shortcut.
Mhm,
It's just a resource. So it
mhm,
doesn't matter how much you've read, what you've learned, where you've studied, how many years, you still, wake up and trip and feel fear and face that, none of being human goes away. We just have more experience and more resources. And so, and this is a very interesting difference, I think, historically in the pursuit of knowledge in the East and the West. In the West, it has often, whether it's unspoken or not, but often wisdom is the understanding of truth.
mhm,
In the East and in indigenous traditions, wisdom is the experience of truth.
mhm,
And so as I've got, and so to go to this is how do we live an embodied life. And so because I believe deeply that it is through our humanity. Our humanity is the tuning fork of the sacred. And so it's through our humanity that we experience oneness, wholeness, what it is as a living part in a living whole, and that's the conversation. And so I think it starts with our being very, Mother Teresa said, courage is doing small things with love. And this is where, there is a chapter in the book about the purpose of goodness.
Mhm.
And which so brings that down to me so very quickly. I think I can go there and to share that a little bit. Is that this really triggered? During the pandemic, I was reading Neil deGrasse Tyson, a wonderful art contemporary physicist, and he had a book that came out for astrophysics for people in a hurry. It was very wonderful title. It was not watered down at all. It's a very potent, dense book, and as I really kind of was wanting to move through that, I was so struck because he shared very quickly. He shared his take, the tribe of physicists and their take on how the universe began and how it came down to such a tiny, tiny gesture that there was matter and antimatter. Matter was photons, positive energy, and hadrons were negative energy. And when there was 1,000,000,001 photons and 1,000,000,000 hadrons, just one more, the universe came into being.
Mm.
And that I kept thinking about how we are here by such a small gesture. And then I was out doing errands, and I think I was in line at the drugstore when all of a sudden it hit me. This isn't a description of how the universe began. This is a description of the ongoing creation of life.
Mhm.
And this is the purpose of goodness, that to be the one gesture that outlasts all the others. And so we don't know if that, if you see someone fall in the parking lot of a supermarket and you go help put their groceries and help them to their car, and nobody else sees that you helped that could be the one photon that kept life going that day.
Mhm.
And we don't know whether what we do will be it or not.
I really like the way in the work that the idea of one thing, you talk about one kindness, one gesture in different places, and it connects me to the idea, because as a poet, you really care about one word after another, things. And I mean, there's a lot of starting in one that I think sort of arises in the book. But I'm thinking about this idea of truth and being truthful in relationship to goodness. I'm thinking about in the section where you say the phrase is something like, so much depends on the courage to tell the truth and keep loving each other. Another reference to poetry, of course, because of William Carlos Williams, so much depends upon a red wheelbarrow
Yes.
glazed with rainwater. And that idea that in one thing, in one moment, so much depends. I mean, he's giving us an image of a whole life that depends on, he's telling us, that a whole life depends on what's
Well,
happening
just like, biologically DNA and all of life is encoded in DNA. Well, spiritually, the entirety of life is encoded in a clear heart.
Mhm.
And when we're clear, we can see mirrored in one clear heart the entirety of existence and possibility. And
Mhm.
so that those one little moments, and we all see them, they're there all the time. We think they appear, but they're there all the time when we slow down to the pace of what is real.
Mhm.
And then everything glows, and we're all stopped by this moment here and there in the city or in nature or by the sea. And because those things are the seams of the universe, they hold all of life together. I just ran into one recently that I was exploring and beginning to write about, and maybe you've heard of it, but it was I was listening and I heard this this talk, and it led me to this thing. It was about a moment in E.M. Forster's life.
Mm.
Now, E.M. Forster, who was the British novelist, wrote Passage to India and many other things. Well, he was a conscientious objector in World War I, wound up being sent to Egypt because of that, where his job was to search for missing servicemen.
Mm. Oh, wow.
And while he was there, because he was openly gay, he met a young man, a tram driver in Egypt, who was the love of his life.
Mm.
And they didn't have very much time together, and he had to go back to England, and then they still corresponded. But then Muhammad El Adel, I think his name was, he married, and then he died a few years later from tuberculosis. And this is this one of those seams of the universe. His widow, who knew of Muhammad and E.M. Forster's love, after he had died, she sent her wedding ring to E.M. Forster.
Oh, wow.
Again, just like Basho tying the empty gift to the saddle, just like that one gesture of helping someone in the supermarket. This gesture that hardly, and of course, I couldn't find the name of the widow,
Mm-hmm.
but that her gesture, I can almost hear the ring drop in the envelope before she sealed it and sent it to England.
Mm-hmm.
That, over 100 years ago, was one of those gestures that holds all of life together.
Mm-hmm. Various places I want to go here and trying to figure out the best way to do it. Because I'm thinking about this poem that you wrote called I just blanked, The Moment of Poetry.
Yes.
Would you mind reading that?
Oh, sure, sure. I think I know that one by heart too. So let's see here. Yeah. The moment, and I call it the moment of poetry specifically because it's not about what we think of as poetry, but
That's right.
about those moments. The moment of poetry, when the sweet ache of being alive, lodged between who you are and who you will be, is awakened. Befriend this moment.
Mm-hmm.
Its sweetness is what holds you. Its ache is what moves you on.
Mm. I mean, it's a great response to what so much depends on.
Well, and this is, let me bring that back to the age we're living in and what we're talking about, because one of the things when we talked, you mentioned the insurrection and, the times that we're in. And I think, and I spent a lot of time in the beginning of the book, as you know, trying to look at my guess at how did we over the last couple of 100 years arrive where we are in this perfect storm of isolation and fear and polarization. And one of the things, obviously us being in such a bubble from reality, that I think so many people through the pandemic, through social media, through the insulation of their own convictions. John Kabat-Zinn wonderfully said at one point, if you are too ensconced in your own beliefs, you will be a convict of your own beliefs, of your own convictions.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but anyway, I think that a great many people in our time have lost their direct connection to life.
Mm-hmm.
And this really hit me because, if you lose your direct connection to life, you lose your reverence for life.
Mm-hmm.
If you have that connection and you have a reverence for life, it's almost impossible to do harm.
Mm-hmm.
So now look at the insurrection and forget the politics. Like many of us, I saw that live on TV and I was stunned, shocked to see barbaric violence while being so detached.
Mm-hmm.
While at the same time, people were taking pictures of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
as if they didn't know whether this was a video game or if this was real.
Mhm.
And that really started me thinking about, this restoring this direct connection of life and empowering people. So like if I put my hand in water, I don't need you to tell me if it's wet.
Mhm.
And likewise, we know what love is, we know what pain is, we know what fear is, we know what cruelty is. And so we can discuss and have many views of what those things mean, but we don't need anyone to tell us what it means to be alive if we're vulnerable and honest. And the reward for that is restoring that direct connection of life. And so I feel it's so important to, especially with young people. I mean, isn't this all of so many of these, especially in the last year or so, these horrible mass shootings, these shooters are these drifting, unhinged young people, often white males, who, I think violence at some point is a last desperate attempt to feel.
Mhm.
And I think I've come to think, this is a metaphor, I've come to think of, these insane mass, these shooters as social aneurysms.
Mhm.
And an aneurysm, we know biologically, is when a weak cell in a body, when the body is under tremendous pressure, that cell explodes,
Mhm.
often leading to a stroke.
Mhm.
Well, we can look at these people and say they're responsible for their actions, they're crazy, but we can't say it has nothing to do with us,
Mhm.
because why does America have more weak cells exploding than any place on earth? Because we've created a pressurized system. So what we're responsible for is creating the pressurized system that's creating an epidemic of social aneurysms.
Mhm. I think about the three archetypal questions that you posed. What can be
Yeah,
repaired? What can be reimagined? What should be left dismantled? And if I can tie that to something that comes later in the book,
sure.
there are two things that stand out for me. And I'm curious because when I read, I think about not only each chapter and what it offers and the kind of inquiry that it raises, but I find myself thinking about the relationship between the chapters. And so I was sitting today with the chapter Here Abide and the one about admiration, which is about looking at the world with wonder. And so, in relationship to the example that you've just given and those questions that really are kind of fundamental for us, what do we dismantle? And how do we dismantle it, and what do we reimagine? But how do we both abide, which is another thing I love, where you actually take us through the meanings of that word, and I love that you note how it arises from Poland, um, but then also to be able to move on and move forward with something while also gazing with wonder. To me it's yeah, that's my question. How do we do those things? We can do them separately, but really it seems like the
Well,
opportunity is to do them relationally.
I think that and we'll talk about, I'm glad you brought that up. We'll talk about admiration as a practice in a minute. But this goes back to the glass being both half full and half empty. The wheel of life never stops turning. But we have
Mhm.
all kinds of philosophies that come from when we stop the wheel. If we stop the wheel of life at the top, oh, let's transcend out of here. Everything's wonderful. Don't worry about all the bad stuff. Everything's beautiful. But if we stop the wheel of life on the bottom turn, then we have nihilists. Then we have pragmatists who fear everything. We say, don't you see how life sucks? This is terrible. Why, what are you talking about? That things are wonderful, that you can admire anything. Yes, yes, and yes. the wheel of life never stops. It's all of those things. And I think that while the mind is a great tool and its chief gift is to sort, prioritize, and choose, the only things that matter, I can say, in my life have been what I've learned from my heart being forced or challenged to absorb and integrate.
Mm-hmm.
And that means letting all things in. I mean, if there's any teacher that's happened to me in the last 10, 15 years, it's the fact or the teaching that all things are true.
Mm-hmm.
All things aren't fair, all things aren't just, but all things are true. And it is by keeping my heart open that I start to understand how. And so a great example of this for me was the great poet Cecil Milosz, who
Yeah.
taught so many. Was born in Poland, was a teenager during the Holocaust, and then came to this country and spent most of his life teaching at Berkeley, as you know.
Right.
Won the Nobel Prize in 1980. But I consider him, what I always call him, is a mature romantic. And why? Because he grew up in the midst of such horror and cruelty. So he never flinched from seeing things as they are. And yet, like one of those miners in coal mines in South America who have the light fixed on their forehead, he just, no matter what he looked at, even if he was looking at something horrible, he would shine a light on it. And it's always both. And we do that by telling the truth, and the practice of admiration is seeing the miracle that waits in everything before us.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do that, we honestly, we also reflect, a light shines on where those qualities that we admire are dormant in us.
Mm-hmm.
So if I admire something about you, it gives me a way to see where that is waiting to come true in me.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the willingness to do that, right? I mean, there is the sort of what we're talking about culturally is where is the willingness to do what's happened to the willingness to see in the other, that how tied in are we to our own beliefs and our own what we're afraid of or what we're concerned about. And because one of the things I notice in the writing and in a lot of the examples that you give, it seems like two things are really important. One is noticing, like I think in the Adrift poem, it's the noticing that you're able to do, that leads you to an insight. So it's that willingness to like notice and then allow it to become something, whether that's reflection or something else. Am I on track in any way with
Yes,
what you're saying?
yes, absolutely. And so I think that, one of the things, and this actually comes from a different book of mine, More Together Than Alone, and which was an exploration of moments when we've worked well together throughout history and across time. And one of the things that it led me to imagine was imagining all the way back to the beginning, cave times, and imagine when the first two people realized they weren't alone. Imagine one person coming to the mouth of a cave and there's another person they see in there. They see each other, they go, whoa. And the person in the cave says, "You're different, go away." And I imagine, because we were talking about imagining, that was the beginning of the go away tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout history, when that fear metastasizes, so then, okay, I can't trust that you're gonna go away, so I need to put you where I can watch you. So then we have ghettos and reservations and detention centers. And then if the fear metastasizes enough, we have these horrible periods of genocide where I can't trust that you'll stay where I put you. I'm going to make you go away.
Mhm.
But if we go all the way back to the mouth of that cave and the other person who saw them first, I imagine that that person said, "You're different. Oh, thank God. Come teach me."
Mhm.
And I think that was the beginning of the Come Teach Me tribe.
Mhm.
And that, when that has grown, when we realize we're more together than alone, that has led to the periods of enlightenment throughout time.
Mhm.
And of course, the catch is we always belong to both tribes.
Mhm. Mhm.
And on
Yeah,
any
I mean
given,
that theme you keep bringing up, things are really a both and, there's so much of just keeping returning to that.
and
We're
so
gonna,
I can tell you that I believe deeply I am of the Come Teach Me tribe, but we could get off this conversation and I could get scared for some reason and switch tribes. And that's when we need each other to say, there's the admiration, the mirror, and say, wait a minute. I think one of the words that um and I love the roots of words, not because I'm a word geek, but because words like nature erode over time.
mhm.
And so often I find myself when I go back as I can to an earlier, more whole definition, there's much more there that's useful, that's helpful. And so one of the great words that has a great original meaning is the word honor.
Right.
It means to keep what is true in view.
Mm.
And
Beautiful,
a great word.
really.
And I think we need that more than ever today. This is some of what we've been talking about. How do we keep what is true in view? How do we honor life itself? By listening, by noticing, by questioning, um, by loving each other through admiration, through
And
heart work.
to me, the respect for words does two things. I mean, I think one of the things that's really interesting in this book, and we haven't talked about it too much, but the way you do connect to the other arts, philosophy, but particularly to history as a way of providing context for what you're saying. And it's the same with the words. It's like, I don't know, you might be a little bit of a word geek, but but I really feel that too, that what you're doing is honoring the word, by allowing us to see it in its fullness, because we carry so much assumption about what words mean. And it's a way of asking us to step back. If we really hold the root, I mean, that idea of radical, of taking us back
Yes,
to the root, it's a kind of way of being radical with language to help us to really think about how to hold it in its fullness, like you're asking us to hold the fullness of possibility and experience.
absolutely, absolutely. In fact, one of the things that as I've gone through all of my life's work, I'm intrigued with. I'm starting to look at doing a book specifically on the origin of words.
Nice. That would be great. No word geek intended. We're just about on our time to move to questions and from those who are listening, but I did want to wrap up with one thing, if it's okay with
Sure.
you. I'm very interested in the way you talk about, first of all, I don't think we talked enough about the nature of storms. We came at storms in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. So I really encourage everyone to tap into that. And very interesting the way that you talk about storms as those things that we encounter or have to engage, and things that we create. But I'm not going to go down that road because of time, but I just want to note it. The thing that I wanted to step into for a second is right at the very end, where you talk about, you say, I can say that if there is an undertaking at the center of this book, it is to devote yourself to the gathering of the self-knowledge of how your heart works. And so I've been trying to nudge you of like, how do you do this? How do you do this? And you kind of just say it there. And then you also talk about writing as this process of, digging the dirt from the hole, but it's really the hole that is ultimately, the thing that matters. And so I just wondered if there's, anything else that you wanted to say about that. And then I just
Sure.
wanted you to end by reading the poem Inside Everything.
Sure, sure. Well, I think again, that I've discovered that this journey of introspection is not just the quest for self-knowledge. It is through authentic inner work we discover the network of life force that holds the universe together, of which we're a part. And so the reward, we can be self-centered, but that's different from when we do authentic inner work. That's where, one drop of water contains the entire ocean. And one drop of pain, if met with compassion, will teach us about the history of pain. And one drop of love has all the love that has ever been exchanged. And the only way to do that is to open our heart and look inside.
Mm.
The only way to do that. And so, yeah, let me share this poem, which has been a great teacher. Um, Let me find where I have it here. Oh, here it is. Yeah. Yeah. Inside everything. Keep trying to hide, and in time you become a wall. Keep trying to love, and in time you become love. Our journey on earth is to stop hiding so we can become love. Everything else is a seduction and a distraction. Courage is staying true.
Mm. Thank you, Mark. I think we should
Oh,
just let that live. It's so
oh,
nice to have this chance to talk with you. It's very sweet. I really appreciate it.
oh,
And
me too, Cindy. Thank you so much.
I'm going to open up our Q&A. People have been patiently waiting, and let's see what they have to say. In your elder years, what are ways you've found to help deal with fears of the increasing vulnerabilities of getting older, especially physically?
Well, I think that is a great question, and I think that I mean I think that one of the things is embracing the humble truth that every day, if I meet it with an open heart, is a good day to live and a good day to die. And and within that, let me couple that with a metaphor that has been a teacher for me. Um, and that's the metaphor of a meteor.
Mhm.
Meteors, we know very few make it to the earth to actually land. They hit the atmosphere, and then as they come through the atmosphere, they flake off and burn up, and they get brighter and brighter until there's nothing left but light. And I think that the metaphor is, I think that's the journey of a spirit in a body in time on earth over a lifetime. And eventually there's nothing left but light. Now, of course, for us, when I wake up and I'm creaking like an old oak tree, that's part of the flaking off. I don't like it when it's happening. Um, and then more personally, I would say, um, one of the things, one of the traumas from almost dying in my 30s from cancer was that throughout much of my life, I've had an either or trepidation about wellness and illness. Like if anything's out of the ordinary, I go, uh-oh, must be I'm ill. I better
Mhm.
check it out. And if things are going along fine, well, that's well. Well, as I'm 71, as I'm getting older, and I'm fine, thankfully. But as I'm getting older, and as all of us who are aging know, we do creak more, and there are a lot of things every day that all of a sudden, I haven't bumped my arm into anything, and suddenly it hurts. Like, where did that come from? And I cannot apply if I can't do the either or anymore. I'll drive myself crazy.
Mhm.
because there's a whole mix of new sensations almost daily. That doesn't mean anything's wrong.
Mhm.
And having come from a trauma center, seeing everything different as wrong or as ill is just plays havoc with your insides. So that's my uh, growing edge, is how do I learn not to do that anymore?
Maybe look with wonder.
Maybe look with wonder.
Let's try this question. Who is your favorite writer and why?
Oh, I have to say, I mean, I can't really say one writer, but I would say in a breath or two, Pablo Neruda, the Chinese poet Tu Fu from the Tang Dynasty, and William Carlos Williams. And I would say, and Walt Whitman and Rilke. So already I'm going on and on, but the why is I admire their being so true to who they are.
Mhm.
And I don't want to be them. It makes me want to be me.
Mhm.
And so I remember, my oldest friend Robert, who was also Robert Mason, who was
Right.
in, yeah, you don't remember Robert, and we're still very, very close friends. And but one day, while I was in graduate school, we were there together, and I had never heard of Pablo Neruda, and he came there's now a building there, but on the back hill uh, at the university before it went into this valley of fields. One afternoon in the gloaming, he brought a copy of Neruda's poems, a book of poems,
Mm.
and I had never heard a voice like his,
Mhm.
and I felt not that I could write like him, but I felt like it was a tribe I belonged to.
Mhm.
And it so excited me that he had borrowed the book from someone, and I couldn't let it out of my sight.
Mhm.
I said, I'll buy him another book, but I can't let go of this.
Mm.
I still have it here in my study. It's one of those that has fallen. And I think it's because of the courage Neruda to see in all worlds,
Mhm.
to see in all worlds,
Mhm.
and not to rule any of those or imaginings, to not to rule any of them out.
Mhm. Yeah, and to give voice in the way that, I mean, all of those writers you listed, very much the voice of their work, the way they use language is very true to, accurate to, their sensibility about the world as well.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that they really use language as a way to evoke the their sense of the world as well as what they're trying to say. Neruda, I will do an entire book of poems that is questions, for example. you
yes,
know the deep lyricism of Whitman, you know a different kind of inquiry, right? That lyricism. Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying. Let's try another one. Here's a good one. What is currently bringing you joy?
oh my God. Well, being home, I mean, I've been traveling so much, but being home with my wife Susan and our dog Zuzu, um, she brings me a lot of joy. Our dog that had died several years ago, and we're very close, but she was really Susan's dog. And Zuzu, when we got Zuzu, to my great surprise, she's become my dog. And
Nice.
so she is just, one of my joys is every morning as I'm up first, I let her out of the bedroom, I open the blinds, and I turn around, and every morning she's on the middle of the living room floor, chest up, tail wagging, waiting for me to rub her chest to start the day.
Fantastic.
and that brings me such joy. And she just waits there, and if I don't come quite right away, the tail wags faster.
That's great. I mean, lots of your examples are connecting to this idea of the simple pleasures, the simple gestures, the simple actions, and the big impact that they have.
Yeah, I think that that's part of this discovery for me, that there's really nowhere to go.
Mm-hmm.
That heaven is right here
Mm-hmm.
if we can accept. I think that's one of the things that's also come from almost dying early in my life was, of course, I plan and I look forward to things, but if I dream anything, it always comes back to here, to now.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to this one. Do you have ideas for how we can build or rebuild community in general, but especially now that we are coming out of a time of isolation and may still be isolating or trying to connect with those who are still needing to avoid public setting?
Well, yeah, and I think it is by being vulnerable, by asking questions, by telling stories, uh, by I do a lot of interviews, and during the summer, this wonderful young woman who runs a journal in London interviewed me and said about that her generation was experiencing an epidemic of loneliness, and did I have any advice? Well, I don't have advice, but what came to me deeply was, um, you don't interview ambulance drivers, you take the first one that comes along.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're lonely, you get out and say hello. It doesn't mean that you're going to meet whoever you say hello to is going to be your lifelong friend. It could be awkward, but you go out and you just try to have human contact by not by being seen, but by listening, by inquiring, by telling a story, by hearing a story, by whatever means possible, restoring that human connection. I think that we discover, after all, of all the friends and people that I've been blessed to love and be loved by in my life, I I never planned to meet any of them.
Mm-hmm.
Do we ever plan love, closeness, friendship? It happens. And it only happens, like the way that seeds pollinate in nature, the wind blows them about. And I think that's one of the purposes of loneliness, is to be the wind that pollinates human connection.
Thank you. How do we cope when we feel stuck and unable to trust others? How can I let down my guard and not be ruled by anxiety and the desire for control?
Well, I think that, and of course, I don't have an answer, but I can speak to, the truth is that I know in my life that often I resist things that have already happened. Like, I don't want to be sad, so I don't accept that I already am. I don't want things to change because I don't want to accept they already have. And so I think that, and it makes that question, and I feel the real, we all feel that's a very difficult feeling to be in. There was a time when I was in my late 50s where I was in a moment where everything around me was falling apart. I was ill, which was a long term. It was because of the chemo I had had many years before. So I was afraid of what was happening in my body. I had lost a job, so I was afraid of the future. And I was about to reconnect with my father after many years. So even though I wanted that, I was afraid of the past. Well, I ran out of tenses. And not through any wisdom, like we talked about on my part. There was nowhere to go except stand where I was.
Mm-hmm.
because that inch under me was solid.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to stand there and breathe until it became 2 inches
Mm-hmm.
and 3 inches and
Mm-hmm.
4 inches. So, one of the things that I would offer is whatever we're feeling, if I'm feeling fear, I need to feel that, but I need to feel it all the way to the bottom, because underneath my fear is a ground that's not afraid.
Mm-hmm. I think that's such an important point you make in the book as well, of that idea that if you can stay with the storm, if you keep staying with it, within it is that place where it, if I understand right, not storm, there's
Yeah.
something beyond the storm.
Well, one of the things I talk about there, it's reference to an anonymous 14th century saying from Japan, that in the center of every storm is a hole
Mm,
like a navel through which a gull can fly in silence.
mhm,
And what that says, we all know that even literally in these hurricanes, in the eye of it is calm. And so we all know that, if you can avoid a storm, great. But if you're caught up in a storm, actually the safest place to go is to try to get to the center of it,
mhm.
whatever that storm may be, inwardly or an actual storm or a relational storm, because that's the only calm place.
Mhm, mhm. Thank you. It's a question from Meg. If this is Meg, and I think it is. Hi, Meg. nice to nice to see you in the question here. In colleges nationwide, faculty work with anxious students who are convinced this era's future storms are not survivable, that we are headed toward mass extinction. What would you share with them from your own hard-earned wisdom?
Well, thank you for that. I think that what I would share is that I believe that, you know even in the most dire projections, this iteration of humanity may not survive, but life will survive and the planet will survive. And it may go through more different forms, but all of that to say that everything we face in every generation is real. And yet I do believe more in incarnation. That is, that every generation, it's our turn. It's our turn to cope with fear. It's our turn to do something about it. It's our turn to meet it. It's our turn to um, outlast the storm. And I think that it's not to minimize, these are very real things. Climate change is incredibly real. And right, if you try to take all that in, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. But again, I go back to not or, but and. Every gesture matters.
Mhm.
Every gesture matters, and we have to live what's before us, both the light and the dark, with our full humanity.
Thank you, Mark. There's one last question.
Sure.
What are your current self-care practices?
My current self practices, which probably could be improved. Well, one is that I'm trying to rest more than I have.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to. I don't want to. I love teaching and being in circle with people, but I'm trying not to travel as much, and I don't want to give up what brings me so much life, but I want to be more balanced. So that's one edge, and I think that one of the things I do for self-care, and I mentioned, is just spending a lot of time doing simple things with those I love. And not, I mean, that was one of the rewards of the pandemic. We had dear friends But we'd always, before the pandemic, we'd get together. Let's meet at this restaurant. Let's go here. Let's do this. And during the pandemic, we just invited people over, and we'd sit when the weather was good, in chairs far apart. And we would always talk when we would go out and share deeply when we'd go out to these places. But it was different when just getting together was the main event.
Mhm.
So that has stayed with me during, like, not always to go and do things, but to be with people and have the relationship be the main event.
Mhm. Thank you, Mark, for that. I think the last thing I wanted to say was it's quite a nice looking book. I
Oh,
admire the design of it as well as the
oh,
work
thank you.
inside, the decision to put text in the front and back pages, on the on the end pages and that sort of thing, and the use of color. It's really nicely done. I hope you
Oh,
feel good about it.
my publisher and my people at St. Martin's will be so happy to hear you say that.
Well, I know that my task now is to invite Alex back, so I'm going to do that, and I will just say thank you again.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope that you will consider joining us for more of our upcoming talks or workshops. This conversation was recorded, so if you'd like to watch it again, or if you'd like to share it with your community, you can find it on our YouTube channel at this very same link, and later it will be on our Facebook page. We will also be featuring this talk on our podcast, which you can find at CIISpod.com or by searching CIIS Public Programs on your favorite podcast app. Thank you again for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your night.